So I don't know about you guys, but when I'm in a historical space or I'm looking at an object in a museum that's behind glass, or maybe I'm wandering through an old city, I often wonder what was it like to be here back then? What was this object used for and how was it used? What did this space act like when it was full of people and life? And my best solution for that was digital solutions, digital storytelling, and placemaking. So my name is Bethany Watrous. I'm an archaeologist as well as a 3D modeler. I'm also a drone pilot and a multitude of other fun things that I pick up along the way. And I've combined the old and the new because I think that that's the best way of helping people engage with and understand heritage in a way that sometimes isn't possible when all you're looking at is a ruin or something behind a glass case. So I've worked with clients like the National Trust at National Priory, the Paralympic Heritage Trust, archaeological groups like CFA, and universities like the University of York to help them tell their individual stories and engage more people in their audiences. So there's a lot of different organizations that can benefit from digital storytelling, not just your typical museums and heritage sites, but even individual people who are interested in conservation of, local headstones or landscapes that are not protected, town halls and city centers, communities. So there's lots of different ways of engaging people in history across all sectors. And as much as there are different ways of or organizations that can engage people with heritage through digital storytelling, there's also a multitude of ways of doing it. So the main ones I'm going to talk about today are digital twinning, which can be laser scanning or doing photogrammetry of an object that exists in the world or a landscape. And photogrammetry is creating a 3D model using photographs and then using specialized software to combine that into a 3D model. We also do reconstructive 3D modeling, so that can be recreating something that no longer exists or has changed so drastically that you want to be able to present it what it used to be, but it no longer exists, so we can rebuild that. You can use mobile apps in a multitude of ways, and we'll get into a few case studies about that. Interactives like touch screens, and then mixed realities like virtual reality and augmented reality. And these are just some of the ways that you can use digital technologies to tell stories and placemaking, but these are the kind of ones we're going to focus on today. So the first case study I'm going to go through was the Paralympic Heritage Trust, and they wanted a heritage trail app to kind of help people understand the Stoke Mandeville area where the Paralympics got their start. So they wanted to incorporate the local and international history of the Paralympics and create an on-site experience, but without having to install the boards to then have to go through the city planning and making sure that these boards would be installable. They thought building an app would be a lot more accessible way to do this, and people could just download those on their phones and use them at their own leisure. So they wanted a virtual trail, something that people could interact with on site, but also maybe just sitting at home and learning about the Paralympics through this app. They obviously wanted it to be as accessible as possible because of their audience. And so we worked really hard to make sure that as many people could use it as possible. And then they had a wealth of archival information, old photographs, oral histories from Paralympians, etc. So they really wanted to utilize those in their storytelling. So we created an app for them that includes two heritage trails. One is simply kind of a trail that doesn't have a lot of information, but it just takes them through the highlights of the local Aylesbury area. And the second main one is the heritage trail around Stoke Mandeville, and involves the history of the Paralympics and has a lot of the archival images and videos, 3D models that they've created from their objects in the archive and things like that. And this app is actually up in the stores now. It's a native app, so it's downloadable from both Apple and Android stores. Those are the QR codes if you wanted to download today. But this is really good timing because of the Paralympic is actually coming up. The Olympics are coming up this summer. So, and yeah, it's just a great way to help educate people with all of this wealth of information that they have. But sometimes people either can't get to the site and go through their museum on site, or there's just more information to be had, and this is a great way to get that out to people. So the next case study I have is at National Prairie, which is a National Trust property up north. So we actually did 2 projects with them, and they're quite different, but actually the end result was to make some part of their heritage there more accessible to people. So the first project was in the top hall. They have this space that was meant to look one way, but then one of the owners died and they never finished making it into that space. So they wanted a way to show audiences that were coming through the hall what this would have looked like in a way that was much easier than trying to explain architectural details to people that might not speak that language. So what they wanted was an on-site experience. It was just going to be a 2D image on an iPad, which is what it ended up being, but it also provided some history and visual impacts for when they were in the top hall. So this is the before and after. And what we ended up doing is using 3D modeling to make a complete reconstruction of the hall so that we could reconstruct the floor. So there's a marble floor in the reconstruction. And with the 3D model, we could project light in the proper way so it would look like it was coming through the window. We could have the reflections from the walls and the doors and things like that reflect in that marble surface. But we could also add in the little statuettes in the inlets and add the appropriate shadows and things like that. And then once that was done, we took it into Photoshop and changed the colors on the walls and added some of those imageries there. So it was kind of a combination of things. We also removed some of the elements like the piano and the chandelier. So just combining lots of different methods to create this 2D image that then can communicate a lot of information rather than trying to express that verbally across to people. The next project we did for them was a doll's house animation. So they have this historic doll's house and they were building a new exhibition for it. But the problem was that the doors slide open, and to illustrate that to people when it's behind glass and it's kind of fixed in place, they wanted to be able to create an animation that helped people understand the way that that would have moved in the past. And they also kind of wanted to have a digital twin for the future. So if perhaps they wanted to do some maybe fly-through animations at some point or some kind of game or interactive, they'd have this digital copy and then they could do that in the future. So what we ended up doing was doing photogrammetry of just the doll's house itself and then each door individually. And then we combined those models, and in the 3D modeling software itself, we did a digital animation that helped people understand how this movement would have happened with the door sliding open. And they've incorporated that into a video that's alongside the exhibit now. And it's just a really interactive and engaging way to tell people something in a visually impactful way. The next case study is a historic building in the shambles of York called Parlour Maid. It's now a scone house. Delicious scones. I recommend it if you're ever there. So what they wanted to do was, they have a historic building and they wanted to help people understand that historic nature. But they also wanted to help people understand the history of scones because that was really important to them. They wanted to give people an on-site experience, but also something that might entice people in if it was on their website. So what we ended up doing was creating a photogrammetry model of the entire building inside and out using on-ground photography, but also drone photography. And then putting those models together. So we've got the entire exterior, interior, cleaned that up, and then made a virtual tour by putting it up on a site called Sketchfab, which is on an online browser that allows you to interact with 3D models. And you can also put informational points there as well. So we've gone through and put some informational points so people can learn more about the building and more about the history of the site. And people can do that from within the cafe, or they can do it at home on their web browser. And the great thing about Sketchfab also is that if the model is set up appropriately, you can actually view this in VR. So if you have a headset, you can go on the website and access this with your own VR headset and move through this like a virtual tour and be completely engaged and inside the building. So it's really fun. So that is a link to the Sketchfab model online. You can also go to Sketchfab and just search Parlour Maid. But that's a really fun one. And if you have a VR headset, I recommend trying that out in VR because it's fun. So the next case study is for an international client. It's actually ongoing. And so it's a bigger project. But one thing that they were working on is in a scrolly telling experience online. So that's scrolling through a website and kind of getting moving 3D models as you're moving through, as well as information. So they've got photogrammetry models of the Giza pyramids, but they wanted also to include this Khufu solar ship, which was buried next to the pyramids in Egypt there. Now, they had a source that had a point cloud of this ship that somebody had created from taking pictures of the ship. And the point cloud is kind of the phase right before you get to a 3D model. So it wasn't quite a 3D model. And what they wanted was, they were hoping I could take that point cloud, clean it up, make it into a 3D model, and we'd be good to go. But unfortunately, the point cloud was quite messy. It didn't have all the sides because the person taking the picture hadn't had access to all sides of the ship. So it would have taken a lot more time to actually try to fix the point cloud rather than just building it from scratch. So this is an example of a reconstructive 3D model that I did, building it entirely from scratch. And that was, we wanted to make sure, obviously, that it was accurate to the real thing because it still exists, and we want to make sure that that's being portrayed accurately. So what ended up happening is I used the point cloud, which was accurately sized, and I used that as a reference to reconstruct. And then anywhere that was unclear, I would use photography from Google, just Google search tourist pictures of the ship. And then I was able to reconstruct the whole thing from that information. But now what we have is a much more impactful way of demonstrating the ship than just having a 2D image presented there. So those are kind of the case studies I wanted to cover, but I just wanted to retouch some of the techniques that I've talked about, just so you can have a better sense of how they can be used. So digital twinning, as I mentioned, is creating a model of something that kind of exists in the world. It can be from landscapes to buildings to small objects, even papers and books and stuff like that. And they're really great for online, but also in-person engagement. They're good for community projects because photogrammetry is just bringing photographs together. So you can have communities taking the photographs, and then you can pull those together and create the model and have people feel like they've been engaged in that. It can be used in a lot of different ways, incorporated into apps and touch screens and augmented reality, things like that. It's also great for recording assets. Say you have a building that's changing over time and you want to keep a record of how much it's changed. You could take a record of that year to year and have a record of that. The next one is reconstructive modeling. So this is a great way to create accessibility to things that people can't see anymore. So in addition to the Giza ship, we've also done reconstructive models of buildings that are in ruin or just completely don't exist anymore. And it's a great way to help people understand what used to be. And these can be used in things like augmented reality or just touchscreen or 2D images even, just to help people understand what used to be. Then we've got mobile applications. So we've talked about the heritage trails, and that's a great way to use archival information. Those can also be really good community engagement projects. But they can also include things like augmented reality and ways of getting people a little bit more interactive and engaged and overlaying what used to be onto the real life landscape. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on mixed reality because all of the things I've mentioned previously can be used within mixed reality. And what I mean is virtual reality and augmented reality. It's a great way to immerse people in the history and get them interacting with it a bit further and provide more education and accessibility to those sites. So that's my time. I think I talked pretty quickly, but that's my website, QR code there. I'm also at stand A3 if anybody wants to come by and say hi. But hopefully we'll have enough time for some questions right now if you have any. Thank you.
Lovely. Is there any questions? Yes, one right at the back. Sorry, someone's just getting a microphone for you. Don't you worry.
Hi, I was just wondering I came in towards the end of this talk, unfortunately. So sorry if I've covered asking something that you've covered in any way. But what method would you recommend out of what you've spoken about for an organisation with a very small budget? Like if we could only pick one thing, what sort of thing might be kind of affordable to somebody working with quite a small budget?
Sure. I would say photogrammetry is a really good solution because it doesn't take a lot of effort to make the 3D models because you can actually do the photography yourself if you wanted to. Yeah. And then it would just be about kind of cleaning up the model afterwards. And with Sketchfab, you could create an online museum basically with all of, if it's artifacts or whatever it is, you could create that online exhibit yourself through Sketchfab, and really it would just be kind of the cleaning up of the 3D model that could be done with us. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Any more questions from anyone? No. Excellent. Yes, right at the front here. Give you mine.
Hi. Thank you. For the trail, what was the process in curating the trail and like the lessons learned from users experiencing it?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
So with the National Paralympic Heritage Trail, they've actually seen a previous app that we created and kind of wanted an exact copy of that, but with their own branding. So they came to us with all of the kind of the written content. They had a student working with them that created all the content, like the written content, pulled all the archival information, and basically told us, this is kind of the trails that we want to create. And we really kind of did the development of it, and we helped with some of that creation because we know how it'll work better in app mode kind of thing. But in other projects there have been where we have to do the research because it's just kind of like, we want a trail, this is the site, but what can be talked about. So it's just kind of a project by project thing really, but Paralympic specifically have been really helpful because they've got the student who's really engaged and really knows what he wants for this project. As far as lessons learned, I think for us with this one, it's been the accessibility aspect, because obviously we have a lot of people who are using the app who don't have visibility or have audio issues. So it's been an eye-opening experience to learn the kinds of considerations that we need to take forward into other projects so that our apps are as accessible as possible, even to situations where like, there's going to be loud noise in this space. So just be aware of that, or making sure that the text is readable for dyslexia and things like that. So that was really important. And we're still trying to test it out, especially with visually impaired users. And actually, it's quite difficult to find people who are willing to test in that area. So I think that's probably a lesson that we're learning as well.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Unless there's any more questions. Yes, there is.
I was just wondering, you touched on it a little bit, but can you give us an example of a really successful use of augmented reality in a heritage setting?
Yeah.
Possible?
Well, it's interesting because so we have not yet done one for a client yet. We're working towards that. But we were building a proposal for English heritage sites, the ones specifically that have no one on site staffing them. And I think that it's such a good idea for those kind of sites, because for when you're going to these sites, there's usually no one that works there around, so you can't even ask people questions. And if there's a board, sometimes they're washed out and you can't read them. But if you had an augmented reality app, you have all this information at your fingertip. You wouldn't have to worry about them. You can do all this independent tour by yourself, but also you can have that overlaying information to show what used to be, and you can interact with informational points. And it just would be, in my opinion, such a rich experience for those kinds of sites. And I think we were talking to them before COVID when they were more interested in audio tours, but I think now post-COVID, I think they might be much more interested in those more engaging services.
Lovely. Thank you very much. We do have time for any more questions if anyone has one. No. And thank you, Bethany.